those out in due course.
Melanie Owen.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the Home Secretary's response today and her statement, and look forward to the timeline that she's going to present around the implementation of the recommendations. In her statement, she did mention support and belief for victims and survivors. One of the biggest supportive actions she could take would be to consider stopping convicted CSE rapists from seeing their children born from these crimes once they are convicted, because they use access to their children to continue their abuse and re-victimise the girls whose lives that they have already ruined once.
Home Secretary.
My honourable friend makes a really important point, because this can be the way, a most appalling way of abuse continuing, because that's what it is, and of abusers being effectively able to use the courts or to be able to use other institutions to continue their abuse and exploitation. We will be taking action in this area. We will be putting forward more measures, and both the Safeguarding Minister and the Victims Minister can have further discussions with her about that.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In Telford, you saw the systematic abuse of so many children who were raped, and you saw a cover-up by police and council officials. Yet not a single member of the police force or council official in Telford has gone to jail, or anywhere else in the country has gone to jail. Can the Secretary of State use her power to set up, as was referred to by my honourable friend, a specialist unit within the National Crime Agency to look at this, to make sure some of those who covered these crimes up are held to account?
So, I do actually think there does need to be stronger action around accountability. And so I think he makes a serious point here about these issues in terms of across public services. But I would also say to him that one of the most effective ways to be able to do that means you have to strengthen the legal framework in the first place. You have to strengthen the legal requirements on those who are responsible, including the duty to report, but also making clear that it is an offence to block or to cover up, and making sure that where there are existing powers, they are properly used, but also making sure that we strengthen them. And I would again just gently say to the honourable member, he was a government minister, including at different times an education minister, for over very many years when people were calling for the strengthening of the law. I do hope he will support that strengthening of the law now, even though he didn't at the time.
Blair McDougall.
Deputy Speaker, can I warmly welcome the measures the Home Secretary set out to pursue perpetrators, to challenge the culture of cover-up, but also her strong statement that nobody should resist the urge to report child rape because of a fear of being labelled as racist. Can I also ask her whether she shares my contempt of those who will take the suffering of victims and weaponise it, particularly through online disinformation, to pursue their own hateful agendas? The attacks by Elon Musk on the Minister for Safeguarding crossed the line for me in the last few days, and earlier I deactivated my X account. And I wonder at what point for the Home Secretary does the continuing presence of government departments on that platform legitimise a space that's not only poisonous now, but is actually dangerous?
Home Secretary.
Well, I think the honourable member is right to say that this has to be about showing respect for victims. It cannot be about just perpetuating misinformation online for the sake of clicks, for the sake of audiences. This has to be about respect for victims and for survivors, and for the practical changes that we have a responsibility to take. I hope in this House we can stick with what has been really the sort of core traditions of the way that this House works, is that actually when we are sitting in front of each other, across the dispatch box from each other or across the chamber from each other, we talk about what really matters to people and to our constituents, rather than simply chasing headlines online.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I welcome the measures which the Minister has announced today in terms of the mandatory reporting, the grooming being an aggregated factor, and also the better use of data. But the fact remains, there is still suspicion, widespread suspicion, that there is cover-up because of the nature of these crimes and those who perpetrated them. And thus you not agree with me that there is need for a national inquiry, because it is now seen that it is a wider problem than what was originally envisaged. Secondly, the cover-up by public bodies has been disgraceful. And thirdly, there are allegations that CPS had a role in ensuring that people were not prosecuted. So rather than this being hiding behind the rhetoric that this is a far-right demand, would she not accept that this is a reasonable response from a government that says it wants to deal with the problem and wants to restore public confidence?
Secretary.
So the very reason that I called, that many of us called for an independent inquiry in the first place many years ago, was because of the deep concerns, both about the scale of abuse, about the scale of the abuse that was going hidden, and also about the total failure of institutions to respond, concerns about information being hidden, concerns about authorities not taking the action that they needed. That is why we called for an inquiry in the first place. That's why we had an independent inquiry that lasted 7 years, that the previous government invested, I think, over £150 million in that inquiry over 7 years, that it also rightly included a 2-year investigation into the grooming gangs, the organised child exploitation as well. But there are also areas where further work needs to be done in local areas, as I've referred to in Telford, as Oldham is now taking forward as well. But really, all of this goes back to the heart of ultimately what you need is the police investigations. The police in the end are the ones who have the powers to get to the truth about perpetrators who are committing crimes, to gather the evidence, to get them before court and to get them behind bars.
Emily Darlington.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Over 500,000 children every year are sexually abused, and there are about as many perpetrators of that. Yet there are some people on the opposite side who only want to focus on a few, rather than the big cases that we've heard come right across, whether it's TV presenters, Catholic Church and others. This is something we have to take seriously and not exploit or chase headlines or look for future funders for our political party. We are actually taking action led by 2 formidable women who will not let any abuser get away with exploiting women, men, or children anywhere, particularly online, which is an inquiry that we are beginning on the Science and Innovation Tech Committee tomorrow, looking at algorithms. Can the Home Secretary reassure the House that it is action that is the priority of this government, not further years of talking, and that is what survivors need?
Secretary.
Well, my honourable friend is right that we do need action, that we need to see progress and change, that there will be further areas that will need investigations, inquiries. I welcome, for example, the inquiry she has just referred to on the Select Committee, particularly on online abuse and exploitation. Now, it says, as we're coming to the close, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that as well as the issue around my real concern, deep concern about the expansion of online, the other area I'm deeply concerned about is the expansion of young people being drawn into abuse as well, and the abuse between teenagers as well, because the exploitation and what is happening to harm young people, that demonstrates, I think, is extremely serious, and that is escalating.
Final question, Dr. Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, the House has agreed this afternoon that cultural sensitivity should not get in the way of police investigations, but it would appear that they have, and they perhaps still are, and that victims have been let down and that current victims may be being failed even today. There is a specific problem with gangs of organised men who are systematically raping and abusing young children. Within that group, there is an overrepresentation of men of Pakistani heritage. We need to understand why. A piecemeal investigation, town by town by town, is not going to do that. It's not going to serve the interests of victims, ensuring that they get the justice they deserve, and it's not going to prevent future cases.
Home Secretary.
Well, she raises an important point that was first raised as part of the Jay inquiry and then as the Casey inquiry more than 10 years ago. And she's also right that we need to see action, because there are real concerns that despite these issues having been raised over a decade ago, that in so many areas, not just around grooming gangs and exploitation, but actually around other areas of child sexual exploitation and child sexual abuse as well, there still hasn't been the action taken to change things. It's why we have to make sure that the action is taken. It's why we have to look at